Traditionally, we say lots of blessings as in Judaism, in synagogues or outside the synagogues. For example, in the beginning of this service, we said a blessing for candles, for lighting Shabbat candles. And after this service, we will say a blessing for wine, for Shabbat, and for bread. And during the service, we said at least 7 blessings. Probably more, way more than 7 blessings. But what is a blessing? I think that it can be defined simply as saying thank you. So when we have a nice meal at the end of the day, we say blessing before we have it. And it is a way to acknowledge and recognize that some people don't have as much as you. When you have time and the opportunity to come for Shabbat service, or to spend 1 day a week without work, then saying the blessing is a way to express your gratitude for what you have. However, certain things don't have a blessing. And this is the question I ask myself, why? And one of them is wearing kippah. So there is no blessing when you put a kippah on, or had any head covering, actually. There is one for talit, but not for kippah. Scholars of Jewish history say that kippah is a relatively new tradition in Judaism. Although today wearing kippah is undoubtedly a Jewish symbol, rabbis wrote most blessings in the Talmudic era, from the 3rd to 7th century of the Common Era. And they didn't see wearing kippah as a Jewish commandment. And therefore, they didn't introduce a blessing. So it came much later than that. This is an example of how blessing can reflect the historical development of religion, or the lack of a blessing. But there is another reason why sometimes people don't say blessings in Judaism. And in her book, Where Justice Dwells, Rabbi Jill Jacobs noticed that in Judaism, there are no blessings for performing ethical commandments, such as giving tzedakah, charity, freeing hostages, or feeding the hungry. There are few traditional explanations for this absence, she writes. First, poverty is understood to involve degradation. And blessings are meant to celebrate the positive, something positive. And there is a disinclination to recite blessings over degradation. Well, in other words, there is nothing positive about the fact that the world is in such a state that you have to give charity or to feed the hungry, that you don't even say thank you for that. Second, we generally say blessings over actions that we intend to complete immediately. Once we set the Shabbat candles, we recite the appropriate blessing immediately. We say a blessing over eating a piece of bread and immediately fulfill this action, immediately put the piece of bread in your mouth. But we almost never discharge our obligations in regard to ethical mitzvot. No matter how much tzedakah we give, we will probably never succeed in fulfilling the obligation to provide for all of the needs of the poor. Even if we feed the hungry this week, we have not solved the problem of hunger. I think it is common for many people, or for many of us, that we feel that the need is too great and that we don't give at all. Sometimes it feels that your help will be too little and will make no difference on a larger scale. This is the dilemma of voluntary donations, of voluntary tzedakah, that we all feel from time to time. We feel that to give, we feel that it's not enough. The concept of voluntary donations is the main topic for this week's Torah portion, Terumah. And this is how it opens, this is how it begins. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור, the Eternal One spoke to Moses saying, דבר אל בני ישראל ויקחו לי תרומה. To tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. Truma means gift or donations. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moves him. And this is a very interesting phrase, heart moves. So that it emphasizes a voluntary notion here. It follows this opening few lines, by the list, a long list of what resources were needed to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and that Jews would carry with them wherever they went. And this section is summarized by God declaring, "Ve'asu li migdash ve'shachanti betocham," and let them make me a sanctuary, migdash, something, a holy place, ve'shachanti betocham, that I may dwell among them. It is very symbolic that the tabernacle was built with voluntary donations. I think that I'm not wrong in saying that most people want to engage in charity. Something in human nature drives us to be compassionate and supportive when we see somebody struggling or in need. I think I'm not under the illusion that most people have a heart that moves them to give their time or money. But what if you cannot support yourself and your family? What if you are poor and in need of support yourself? And then you hear this phrase that whoever gives donations, then it will be built the sanctuary will be built. I know that many people today have noticed that the price of living has gone up and will be even higher in the near future. The cost of essential food, electricity and gas is above what many people can afford. It is very likely that people who were on the edge of poverty before might not manage to meet their ends now. Considering the current financial climate, the question that this week's Torah portion provokes is this: how can you participate in the act of building community, the holy place where all are supposed to be equal, if you cannot contribute? Does this mean that Torah values, and especially the institution of Judaism, is deeply unequal, and only those who have surplus can feel that they contribute and their equal part? It certainly doesn't sound right. The medieval Jewish commentary book, Zeda Laderech, has this view. The use of the plural pronoun among them instead of the singular in it. Right, that will be the next quote. Instead of the singular in it, referring to the sanctuary, is meant to teach us that the divine presence doesn't rest in the sanctuary on account of the sanctuary, but on account of people, for they constitute the temple of God. It is people who should be the focus of any system and any society, not the system itself. But the meaning of these verses goes even further. To be of these verses goes even further. To be a part of building the community, the sanctuary, is not only about giving, but also about willing and ability to receive. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart moves them. Not only giving by accepting gifts is the emphasis of the Torah. People can be equally too mean, rephrasing the prayer book. People can be equally too mean to give and too proud to receive. But both are equally important for constructing the sanctuary and building the community. Another rabbinic source, Avod de Rabbi Natan, records this statement by Rabbi Tarfon. Even God doesn't cause God's presence to dwell among Israel or among people until they do the labor of building the sanctuary. As it says, build me a holy place, the sanctuary, and then I will dwell amongst them. There is nothing wrong with having a prosperous and comfortable life for you and your loved ones. There is no admiration, virtue, or aspiration in poverty in Judaism. It is our shared responsibility not only to build a beautiful and comfortable life, but also to build a society where all people at least have a warm house, food, and clothes. It is not the beautiful sanctuary that makes the LJS a good community, but people who come here, who engage with charity and social justice, who fight for the needs of others and break the chains of injustice. It is not the stones and silver that represents the LJS, but people who receive help from our members. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs once said that Judaism urges us to rediscover beautiful but counterintuitive truth, that a nation is strong when it cares for the weak, that it becomes rich when it cares for the poor, and it becomes invulnerable when it cares about the vulnerable. That is what makes the great nation. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will.